Hi everyone! Today we'll be talking about the moderator mediation and the highest process. My name is Alessia and I'm a teacher for Athena Studies. For anyone that doesn't know Athena Studies, what we do is analyze exams from previous years, and based on that, we derive what is important for you to know and what isn't for the exam. Therefore, today I'll be explaining to you the moderator mediation and the ICE process from the course Apply Methods and Statistics, and how to answer a type of exam question that you are very likely to get at your exam. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at the exam question. So what we have is that they ask us which of the following statements about the process output above is true. Before we answer this, let's have a look at the theory behind it. First question is, what is moderation? Well, moderation is a conditional effect. So basically, whenever we are going to see a variable that is affecting an effect. So not a variable that has an effect on a variable, but a variable that has an effect on the relationship between two other variables. And that's why we say conditional effect. An example would be here, valence of emotion, effect on self-care, so the relationship there, will be dependent on the variable relationship. So basically, the variable relationship is affecting an effect. So it's affecting a relationship. And this variable relationship is going to be called the moderator. So what is happening is a moderation, and relationship is the moderator or interaction term. An advice at the exam, whenever you're going to see the dimension conditional on, depends on, or that there's an interaction, then you know that they're talking about moderation. So we're going to have a variable pointing at an arrow and not at a variable. There's two types of diagram that are important for us to remember. One that is just like this one up here, which is called the conceptual diagram. So basically, we will see a variable where the arrow points at an arrow. This is the conceptual diagram. Or we could have the statistical diagram. What changes here is that now the variable will not be pointing at the arrow anymore, but will be pointing at the variable that this arrow was pointing at. And we're also going to see this new variable, which is the result of the interaction or multiplication of the moderator, x2, and the x1. So the original variable from which the arrow, the relationship, the effect was coming from. Now for the exam, what might they ask from you? Well, they might give you the conceptual, and then they ask you, which of the following is the corresponding statistical diagram? So it's very important for you to remember how to move from one to the other. And this was moderation. But then we can also have moderated mediation, which is a step further. So mediation is about the indirect effect. So for example, the fact that X has an effect of Y, but indirectly passing through M. And M is going to be our mediation. So it's in the middle of this relationship. While W is going to be the moderator, because just like we saw in the previous slide, it's pointing at an arrow. So it's moderated mediation because this indirect effect has a moderation on one, or it could also be on both of these arrows. And this is the conceptual diagram. The statistical, just like before, now W will be pointing at N, so following the direction of this arrow, plus we're going to see X times W. What is IS process then? Well, this is a comment that you can find in SPSS, which will help us find out how big this moderated mediation, so how big this indirect effect, which we also call conditional indirect effect, is, and if it's significant or not. Okay, so what is important for us to know? First of all, the first column here, we're going to be able to see the name of the mediator. So in our previous example, the M. So the one that was in the middle of the indirect relationship. And here, the mediator is neg tone. The second column is going to be the values of the moderator. So neg experience is the moderator, and these are the values that it takes. Then we're going to see the effect, and this are going to be the indirect effect. So basically, if the moderator negative experience is minus 0.73, the indirect effect will be minus 0.0362. And then the last two important things for us to remember are these last two columns, and those are the confidence interval. Why is the confidence interval important? Well, because it will help us make the conclusion if the indirect effect is significant or not. How do we do that? Well, if we're going to see that 0 is in the interval, just like in the first two scenarios, because we go from minus something to plus something, so 0 is in there, then it's going to be not significant. Well, if we go from a negative to a negative value or a positive to a positive, meaning that the 0 is not in our way, then it's going to be significant. Okay, so let's go back to the exam question. Now, before I answer, I'm going to wait 5 seconds. So here, put pause and try and answer. Okay, I'm going to move on to the answer. So the statement that is true, so the only correct one, is statement D. So the indirect effect is non-significant for the lowest value of the moderator. Let's see. This is the column of the indirect effect, and they say that it should be non-significant for the lowest value of the moderator. This is the lowest value of the moderator, 4.12. And let's see, is it not significant? True, because the 0 is in the interval. We go from minus to plus. Let's also see, why are the other three false? Okay, first of all, the first statement said that when the value of the mediator equals 5.12, the indirect effect equals 0.5247. Well, this is false because it should be when the value of the moderator equals 5.12 here, the indirect effect equals 0.5247. So mediator is res pap, but sexism is the moderator. The next statement is that the indirect effect equals 6.12 for the highest value of the moderator. Where is the indirect effect? Well, the indirect effect is this column. So if we go to it, the indirect effect equals 0.8157 for the highest value of the moderator. This is the value of the moderator, not the indirect effect. And finally, the indirect effect is significant for all values of the moderator respup. There's two mistakes here. First of all, that the moderator is not respup, but the moderator is sexism. And second, is not significant for all values. It's significant for all values except 4.12. Because if we look here at the confidence interval, we see that in the first one, we go from minus to plus. So the 0 is in the interval, hence not significant. While for all the others, the 0 is not in the interval, from positive to positive. So the others, it is significant. Okay, well, I wish you very good luck with studying, and maybe I will see you at the full training. Bye!